Our Eye on Tech coverage continues. An $80 million loan has been granted by the African Development Bank Group's Board of Directors to fund the project in Ekiti State known as the Ekiti Knowledge Zone. So the zone aims to create about 26,000 jobs, encourage digital innovation and entrepreneurship, and bring in an estimated $14 million in net economic benefits annually to the state. And here, joining us to talk more about this is the Commissioner for Finance for Ekiti State, Akintunde Oyebode. Honorable Commissioner, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rotus. Thank you very much.
So tell us, how did this come about? Was this an offer or opportunity that the AFDB already had existing and you just keyed into it? How did this loan come about?
Actually not. So this started in 2010.
Wow.
Yeah. So when Dr. Fayemi first became governor, he had a vision to build on the heritage of Ekiti. You know, I like to say we have the highest density of professors per capita in the country, very high literacy rates, you know, a well-educated set of people. We lead Nigeria when it comes to education and knowledge. But that knowledge hasn't really translated into prosperity for the people because our best and brightest continue to migrate to other climes, both domestically and internationally. So the vision was to build an economic zone, you know, build some prosperity and economic value out of what has been our heritage. And then when he came back in the second term, we presented that and a few other projects to AFDB. But the benefit of also having a continuity in vision, in planning, in execution, is that when the current governor took over, he was secretary to the government at the time.
Right.
So he didn't need an introduction into that vision. So he led that from the front in getting us a free trade zone approval from the federal government to start with, and then ultimately going through the diligence and evaluation process with the African Development Bank. So this particular process started in 2019 when we went to AFDB with our project. So we led with that, and the bank really liked the idea. They liked it so much that they gave us a grant of $250,000.
Okay.
Just to do the project preparation, do the environmental and social impact assessment, resettlement action plan, and of course the feasibility study to show that the project actually contributes economic value to the state. So it's not a white elephant, nice to have project.
Gotcha.
We had to defend the value created from developing Ekiti Knowledge Zone.
Fantastic. Thanks for the background there. So the ambitions of the knowledge zone, can you talk about in terms of, like, look, there's a heavy emphasis on tech particularly.
I mean, it's tech enabled, but the emphasis is really on services, right? But as you know, in today's economy, there's very little you can do in the service industry without technology. So it's really, I like to say, it's not just tech businesses, but it's businesses that require technology enablement. So if you take a standard call center operation, for example, a business process outsourcing company, you know, it's not a tech-heavy business, but it requires CRM, it requires, you know, broadband connectivity, etc., and it requires a well-trained, you know, knowledgeable set of people. So the idea here is to make this the service center of the country, and ultimately the service center of the sub-region, before we then start to think about continental aspirations.
Gotcha. So what would, for a startup that is looking at Ekiti versus, I don't know, Osun or somewhere else, what's the selling point for Ekiti? What would attract?
So let's dimension it in two parts. Before we talk about the startup, let's talk about the existing businesses, right? So if you are a Conga who just left you, or you're a Paystack, or you're an MTN, what you have first is a free trade zone, right, where you have all sorts of imports, forbearance, you have a lot of waivers, etc., especially for people with regional aspirations. So say you're trying to, Flutterwave, for example, is expanded into 3 or 4 countries on the continent, right? Say they want to go into 6 more. They bring in their staff, they bring in their equipment, all of that into EKZ, right? They get all of these benefits, and then they also get a zone that is specifically built for them. There's also access to talent, because apart from the 6 tertiary institutions in Ekiti, there's 30 plus tertiary institutions in the neighboring states, right? So there's a talent pool. You don't have to bring your staff from Lagos, right? You can hire people, you know, within Ekiti and its neighboring states. The cost of living is much cheaper. There's high-speed broadband connectivity, there's power, there's security, and if you like hiking, like me, there are hills to hike.
You're a fitness buff, that is correct.
So there's all of these things that make it an exciting place to be. But most importantly, it's also how eco-friendly it is, right? It's a green city, and we've built this on the concept of the 15-minute city, right? So you can work, you know, recreation, live, all of that within a 15 minutes, radius. And for us, that also reduces, carbon emission. And Ekiti, if you haven't been,
I haven't. I need to visit.
You should.
I need to visit. Yeah.
The air is clean. You hear the birds in the morning. It's really great. I love living there, and I don't see any reason why anyone won't.
Yeah.
But also importantly is that we've also built an airport. We are going through the civil aviation certification for that now. But the idea is for people to be able to land in there, conduct their businesses, and leave. Talking to all of these companies, one of the things that you need to check is, can I land in your state? If I can't do business there. So for multinationals, there's a lot of opportunities. Now to the startups. We're doing something, I like to say, similar to what Startup Chile was. So there's, as part of this financing agreement, there's a $5 million startup fund that will be set up. Primarily, in fact, solely for startups that are operating in Ekiti. So if you are building your business there, you obviously have access to funding, apart from being in an ecosystem, right, of similar companies, like-minded individuals, with the network effects that will bring.
That's fantastic. Hey, for a moment there, you're sounding like the tourism minister of Ekiti State. Fantastic. And in fact, COP28 is going on right now, so thanks for plugging in the environmental positives there. So with that being said, because I asked this to the gentleman from Conga, let me ask you as well. The jackpot thing, is it overhyped? If you train a lot of these folks, how do you feel about them leaving Ekiti State? I mean, does that turn into remittances for you? What's your view on that?
Look, I don't have a view. I think migration is part and parcel of human existence, right? People migrate for all sorts of reasons, right? Some it's family network, some it's economic opportunities, etc. But I think at the heart of migration, for us, we want people to migrate into Ekiti. Because migration also, people who migrate tend to be the most determined, best and brightest, people who want to take advantage of opportunities. So I don't have a say on whether people should migrate or not. But for us, it's to make Ekiti a destination for migration. Now, of course, not all the people we train will stay in the States. Some will go back. Some will. For example, right. You could say that my father migrated from Ekiti, right? Because post-secondary school, he left Ekiti.
Right.
Now, I've done the reverse, right? Which is come back from where I used to live into Ekiti to work, right? So, I don't have a view on whether or not people should, but I think the heart of it for us is, and why we did this, is that we recognize that our best and brightest left Ekiti early. Now, there's a space where if your most productive workforce is leaving, obviously that has issues with productivity and economic value for the people. So what we're doing now is creating opportunities, saying to people, look, you can work 1-2 jobs out of Ekiti State because there's high-speed internet, right? And it's cheaper, much cheaper to live. There's little or no traffic, right? You get to eat fresh food. You have all the lifestyle benefits, and you still get to keep a lot more of your disposable income. So for us, the story is about saying, invest in the future, because people, if there's no hope in a better future, people vote in different ways, right? They vote with their faith, most especially. So for us, it's really saying to people, this is the future we see. We're trying to create that future, and we want to do it in a way that is credible. So, because the credibility is the most important thing. Right. If people don't believe your story, then they're still going to go regardless.
Yeah. It looks like every time you come on, there's always one milestone after another. You guys are crossing Ekiti State. Last time we had you on was on the Wealth Fund, which we talked about extensively. Is any of that going to go into this project, or these are two separate things? So the Wealth Fund could support some of the things we're doing with EKZ. What we always try to do with the state is to create an ecosystem. So nothing happens in isolation, right? So, for example, with the Wealth Fund, there's a space where we could crowd in some of that money to support some of the startups or some of the companies operating in the States. There's a space where we could crowd in some of that money to provide guarantees, right, to people who want to invest in complementary, services or activities. So the fund has an ability to invest in things like that. But it's not primarily going to be directed at Ekiti Knowledge Zone. Gotcha. Since we're talking about tech, I want to get your thoughts. Artificial intelligence, is that overhyped? Is that part of the conversation? Is Ekiti looking at that down the line? What's your take on AI?
I think clearly, for many reasons, right? For the use cases that AI supports, for ethical reasons, for economic reasons, the starting point is even saying, what is our national policy, right? So we are a subnational, right? So we have to align with what the sovereign is doing. I do think that it's important that Nigeria takes a very clear stance in terms of just the policy framework governing artificial intelligence. Otherwise, even a lot of these jobs we're talking about, if you recall, 20 years ago, you could have a call center of 20,000 people, right? Today, with chatbots, with all sorts of predictive tools, you don't need that many people, right? So the trend has shifted, and you don't want to be, I always say that the bigger problem with us in Nigeria is that we are always hit by a curve, by a trend that we do not shape. So if you think about how oil palm disappeared, what next? Then there was crude, what next, right? So we never really shaped the conversation, and I think with technology, with the service economy, with the quality of Nigerian talent available, both within and outside Nigeria, there's an opportunity for Nigeria to shape this policy, especially for developing nations, because the developed nations have done quite a bit. From Canada, I think, who started this in, was it 2017 or so? Yeah. There's like 50 or 60 countries, mainly developed nations, who have said very clearly what their AI policy is. Right? It's important for the developing nations whose economic realities are very different to do similar work. And I think Nigeria has a unique opportunity to lead on that front.
Great stuff. Now, I want to ask you about the education pipeline. You've already talked about the fact that, as far as density is concerned, highly educated force in Ekiti State. So, if I was to ask you about that, the pipeline of skills to assist all these programs, Ekiti doesn't have a problem there. You've got, as far as the education pipeline is concerned.
Look, there's a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
So starting from basic education, we've got the second lowest percentage number of out-of-school kids, right? So we're sending most of our kids to school, right? Enrollment rates are going up. Over the last 4 years, gone up 23% primary school, 19% secondary school. And pass rates are also going up. It is very difficult to combine both.
Right.
Higher enrollment, better quality of learning, right? But we've invested significantly in basic education. Now, the second part for me is broadband connectivity, right? Which is where we're investing today. Again, I've said it on the show before. We're the first state to drop the right-of-way tariff for a very specific reason, to get fiber to the last mile, right? Now, that work is ongoing. But from a tertiary perspective, even from those graduating from universities, secondary schools, we've run some programs with Facebook, with Microsoft, with big technology companies, just to say, let's see the proof of concept. If we train 500 people today, how many finish the program, right? We see a drop-off rate of 30–40%. And what's causing that drop-off rate? Obviously, high data costs, these are data-heavy videos, etc. People can afford to pay for those programs. And fiscally, if we subsidize a program, we can also subsidize the data.
Right.
So what we're trying to do now is to say, let's reduce the cost of broadband, right? Let's get high-speed internet to the last mile. That allows people to learn better. But the reality is that with the lessons we've seen in our pilots, in our proof of concept, these guys are intuitive learners, right? So you take a 17, 18, 19-year-old boy who's never seen a computer before. In 6 months, proficiency level is much higher than mine.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's lessons to be learned from that. We've also done something called the Regional Education Network, where we've connected all our tertiary institutions in Ekiti. Okay, so they're on a local network to foster collaboration, to ensure, you can't have a University of Education, Science and Technology, for example, and that university doesn't have internet.
Right.
So those are the things that we're doing to ensure that people who come to Ekiti to learn actually live as, digitally savvy, digitally aware people.
This is in-depth stuff. Okay, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun with this next question here, because you seem to be focused on your state you want to develop. Challenging Lagos down the line, if every other state was going as in-depth as you are with this preparation, with what you're doing, can Lagos, because we know where Lagos status is for startups and internet and tech and so on, can that be challenged down the line?
There are two things here, right? So that, when I can still come into Lagos every now and again.
Yeah.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we get this right, and I have every inch of confidence that we will, in fact, not if, when we do this correctly, it actually lifts the profile of the country. Now, if you think about Kigali Innovation City, right? It's one city in Rwanda. But the moment Carnegie Mellon went in there, people started to look up, hey, something's happening there. Now, that has created a ripple effect for the rest of the country. So it's not really about challenging Lagos. It's more about saying we want that tide to rise, right? It will lift us, it will lift Lagos, it will lift every other. You can all of a sudden live in Osun State, for example, and come and work in Ekiti, right? Or, ultimately, we want you to live in Ekiti.
Right.
But the reality of the thing is, look, if we get our national policies right, Nigeria has a unique opportunity to lead Africa in the service economy. So we're not really challenging Lagos. What we're doing is we're using Ekiti to challenge Kenya, to challenge Ghana, to challenge South Africa. You know, those are the people we really want to take on.
All right. Well said. Well said. Okay, so as far as, thanks for joining us. It's the first day of the last month of the year, so we're now looking to 2024. As you look into 2024, what's the next steps for the knowledge zone at this point?
I mean, I think for us, the first thing is the loan approval. I always say is the easiest part. Right. So the work has just started. Now, we obviously need to go through all the governance processes to ensure that we can make the loan operational. The loan has been included as part of the external borrowing plan because, you know, AFDB lends to the sovereign, to Nigeria. Nigeria then signs a subsidiary loan agreement with us. So we are awaiting the consideration of that external borrowing plan by the National Assembly, which is ongoing, and we expect that that would be, I mean, for a project of this nature, that adds this much value to the country, we expect that the National Assembly will obviously give us assents and have that in the external borrowing plan. Once that is done, we meet all of the conditions precedent to draw down, and we expect that we can start the procurement, right? Because a lot of this is construction, you know, infrastructure, buildings, power, water, etc. We expect that will start probably third quarter of next year in terms of actual boots on ground, you know. But the process is, I mean, we've been here for 4 years, right? So I always say to people that, look, public service is a marathon. You know, it's not a sprint. It requires lots of stamina. And, you know, nation building is an ongoing exercise. So we'll do our part and hopefully hand over to successive governments to take this forward into 20, 30 years from now.
Hey, speaking of successive governments, well, of course, new administration now. I just want to take things macro level. My final question for you. New year. So for Nigeria as a whole, you're optimistic for where the economy is going to be going, you know, as in the new year and so on?
I'll say cautiously. You know, it's been a rough couple of years for many reasons, right? But I think that we've started to see some policy correction. You know, on the macro side, I think the federal government, if not even the federal government, the central bank has done some, you know, has taken us back to what you might call, you know, an orthodox monetary policy system, right? Raising rates. I mean, as a state government finance commissioner, I'm taking the spanking for higher rates, but it was necessary for Nigeria because I think, unlike many people say, inflationary pressure is driven by money supply dislocation. It's not all of these constraints. The constraints are there, but if you look at the real, the numbers, it's a dislocation in money supply. So reining that in is very important, and I think that raising rates has done that. I also think that as we get some exchange rate stability, now I'm not saying that the naira should appreciate, but the important thing, and I always say to people that forget the value of the naira. What is more important is the volatility, right, in exchange rate, because it allows for people to plan, it allows to set replacement cost, and some of the inflation we've seen is because, as the man from Conga was saying, the uncertainty in pricing means that your replacement cost, you always have to keep a buffer. Now that buffer feeds into the CPI. So I think that we'll start to see some tapering on inflation. I do think that there will be some exchange rate, you know, stability. So I don't see a reason why, if we get the right set of policies in place, I don't see a reason why we can't achieve, say, with all of this, right, we're still growing as an economy at almost 3%, right? So I don't see any reason why 2024 we can't see 5-6% economic growth. Because for me, the target for the government has to be very clear. GDP growth must now start to outstrip population growth by a distance, right? If we don't do that, then whatever the numbers are, it's going to always impoverish the people.
We'll end on that optimistic note. Akintunde Oyebode, the Commissioner of Finance of Ekiti State. I got to visit. I have to make sure. That's my 2024 bucket list to visit Ekiti State. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you, and congrats on the progress you guys are making.
Thanks, Rotus.